Hello. Thank you all for joining today's program about the Thrive State and a holistic approach to peripheral neuropathy with special guest speaker, Dr. Kien Vuu. This program is made possible by our sponsor, Live On Labs, who I acknowledge and graciously thank for supporting this program and the Foundation for Peripheral Neuropathy's mission. For those who may not have heard about this until today, the Thrive State is a holistic approach for patients with peripheral neuropathy or any chronic illness. The Thrive State is an energetic field, a state of being that each of us can learn to harness to activate more health, resilience, and hope into our lives. That even during times of uncertainty and hardship, we can access the Thrive State to unlock the resources within ourselves to heal and improve our health, spirit, and lives. My name is Lindsay Colbert. I'm the Executive Director of the Foundation for Peripheral Neuropathy. And again, I thank each of you for tuning in today's program and supporting this organization. Before we get started, just a few minor logistical matters to address. I wanted to remind everyone that this presentation is being recorded and it will be emailed to you and also uploaded onto the Foundation for Peripheral Neuropathy's website within about a day or so. Please submit any questions you have via the questions box. We'll try to answer them at the end of our webinar during the Q&A portion. And if for any time you're having trouble with the audio, feel free to try to dial in by phone. Feel free to check your registration email for those dial-in instructions. Now, I am pleased to introduce today's guest speaker, Dr. V. Coming to America as the only surviving infant on a refugee boat fleeing post-war Vietnam, Dr. V is no stranger to adversity. Once a minimally invasive surgeon who has overcome 2 chronic diseases, he is now a passionate health and human optimization champion and best-selling author of Thrive State, your blueprint for optimal health, longevity, and peak performance. As one of the most sought-after performance and longevity physicians in the country, Dr. Vuu regularly works with celebrities, athletes, executives, and corporations to optimize their health, performance, and vitality. His mission is to empower people and organizations to reclaim their health and serve with fulfillment, abundance, and purpose. He enthusiastically shares his messages on national TV shows such as The Doctors and Access Hollywood, keynote and corporate stages such as Whole Foods and Biohacking Conference, as well as with the generation of physicians and assistant clinical professors at UCLA. We are so honored to have Dr. V here with us to present at today's program. Dr. V, thank you again.
Hello. I thought I'd include a little bit of coming in to an entrance, and I want to thank everybody for being here today. Mostly, thank you for your time and for your attention. You know, it seems ever so often some outside force or pressure, the loss of a loved one, a virus, a diagnosis, comes in and it tears apart the fabric of human ecosystems, our bodies, our spirits, and our communities. You know, back in December of 2020, there's a cruise ship called the Diamond Princess that was set to do a 14 trip around Asia for people to celebrate. Now, about 5 days into the trip, somebody gets sick, an elderly gentleman, and he had to disembark in Hong Kong. He had a cough and a fever, and the Hong Kong authorities actually diagnosed him with COVID pneumonia. They actually told the cruise ship captain at the time, but the cruise ship captain was reluctant to tell the rest of the crews for another 2 days. But when he finally told them, he said, hey, you know what? There's been somebody with COVID pneumonia here. At the time, people didn't know what was going on. They still party. People were celebrating their anniversaries, their birthdays, people from all over the world. By the time they got back to Yokohama, Japan, 14 days later, several people became symptomatic. And the port authorities at Yokohama actually quarantined this boat for 28 days. Now, this is actually a social experiment that can't really and ethically be done, except in this case, which is get people from all ages, from all races, from all over the world, and put them inside this container expose them to a new and novel virus, and then see what happens. Now, ultimately, 1 in 5 people would become infected, and 2% of them would ultimately die. A larger percentage actually had long-haul COVID symptoms. Now, this brings about some very important questions. Like, for example, how do some people under the same pressure have these fatal effects while other people aren't affected at all? How do some people have the mental, physical, emotional, social, and spiritual fortitude to handle stress while others do not? What's the one common denominator for people that are able to thrive under stress versus those that don't? And the answer to that is optimized human potential. You see, to be a human being alive today means that we've actually already inherited years and years of natural selection from our predecessors. We've actually had the biological machinery that has an immune system to fend off against pathogens. We developed the mental acuity to put a man on the moon, the emotional intelligence to create great works of art, the physical capability to scale the world's highest mountain. Every person living past 100 today is living proof that there's no artificial limit for how long we could live or even thrive. And to thrive, that actually is the driving force of every single species on this planet, to become a better version of itself. Now, after this pandemic, people are no longer willing to just hang around and wait for what happens to their health. People like yourselves are empowered and they want to know the tools and the knowledge and the frameworks to become the best and healthiest versions of themselves. Now, fortunately, through ancient wisdom and modern medicine, there's a framework to optimize human potential. And I'm going to share that with you all today. Now, back on the cruise ship, a year after this incident, the captain was asked what he thought of his experience. And he said, "A diamond is a chunk of coal that did well under pressure. I would like to think that we were be remembered as one big family that under some very challenging times remained united with sacrifice and went through these problems." Now, English wasn't his first language, but he did raise some very important points. In fact, he's wrong about one thing. A diamond actually isn't from coal. It's from something even less than coal, something that's more insignificant than coal. These things called carbon deposits. Now, these carbon deposits, hundreds of miles beneath the Earth's surface, when given heat, when given time, and when given pressure, actually creates this beautiful, brilliant diamond. And once that diamond is formed, it can't be broken. And after studying the longest of the populations on the planet and the highest performing people on the planet, this is almost a universal law for transformation, a universal law for becoming the best versions, the greatest versions of ourselves. So remember that formula: heat, pressure, and time. You know, back in the pandemic, certainly I had my share of pressure. I was about to be a new dad, January 2021. I wasn't able to see my fiance go through her prenatal visits at the time because they weren't letting people in. And when we were 40 weeks in, her OB says we should go into the hospital to get induced. And so we did. We get into the hospital, the nurse puts in the IV, she starts the induction process, and she says, "Dr. Vuu, it's going to be hours before anything happens, just relax." So I remember just lying there next to this hard hospital bed trying to go to sleep. 30 minutes later, I hear 2 footsteps come in. We're trying to adjust the monitors. Minutes later, 4 footsteps come in. Oh, we're having problems finding the baby's heartbeat. I'm starting to wake up here. All of a sudden, I see the doctor on call come in. They roll a ultrasound machine in, put the ultrasound on my fiance, takes a look, and I see the baby's heartbeat. I'm a doctor. I could see these images. That's supposed to be beating 160 beats per minute doing this. And the doctor turns to me and says, "Dr. Vuu, your baby might die if we don't have an emergency C-section right now." What? We weren't prepared for this. We end up in the operating room table. And when I first heard the baby cry, I was thinking, thank God, baby's doing great. They asked me, "Dr. Vuu, do you want to cut the cord?" So I head off and I'm cutting the cord. I remember taking some selfies, and I'm looking down and I noticed something. She's not moving very much. I hear alarms going off. Her oxygen's going from 90 to 80 to 70. I'm just trying to wake her up. Hey, baby, daddy's here. The people that just gave me high fives and congratulating me wouldn't even look me in the eye anymore. And I remember getting a touch on my shoulder. Dr. Vuu, we need to take her to the ICU now. Moments later, her OB walks in and she says, Dr. Vuu, I found your baby with her cord wrapped around her neck and ankle. Wait, what? How long have you guys known about this? Did she lose any oxygen? Will she have the choice to live? My baby didn't choose to be born with a cord wrapped around her neck and ankle. And in that moment, I feared she might not be able to make any choices, which is why I'm here today, to remind us of the gift and the power of choices, difficult ones, empowering ones, conscious ones, to access the best version of us, to find our hidden resources, to be able to take the symptoms that we have and improve them as well. That's why I'm here to share. So, the field of longevity and performance medicine is a fascinating one. And not only is the vision of this field to be able to extend life, but to preserve it as well, preserve our mental and physical capabilities as we age. And there's a lot of technologies there. We've got technologies that can track our blood pressure, our blood sugars, our sleep. We've got new medications that are out there. Stem cells, exosomes. Clearly, there's been remarkable advances in what I call the science of longevity. However, I wonder how many of us are forgetting about a very important medicine, the art of living. You see, there's a paradox when it comes to the expanding technology space in medicine that was eloquently described by the Dalai Lama when he said, the paradox of our history in time is that we have taller buildings, but shorter tempers. We have wider freeways, but narrower viewpoints. We spend more, but have less. We buy more, but enjoy it less. We have more conveniences, but less time. More medicine, but less wellness. We've learned how to make a living, but not a life. And we've added years to life, not life to years. Back in that hospital, I was just hoping for a chance at life. And in that moment, I just realized what a precious gift it is for all of us to be alive right now. But this conversation is not about a chance at life. It's about the choice to live. Benjamin Franklin said some people die at the age of 25. They're just not buried until 75. So we're just merely pushing back the time we're buried with all this science, and we forget about choosing to create a beautiful life. Now, I've studied some of the world's longest lived populations, and it is through conscious choices they were able to activate the biology of longevity and human performance. So let's make the case today that with all the advent of anti-aging and longevity medicine, we're not simply fated to just extend life without enriching, expanding on, and enjoying life itself. We can do both. But what stops us from our potential? What stops us from living our healthiest life? Well, scientists are beginning to learn more about a part of the brain called the default mode network. This is actually the survival autopilot mode of the brain. In fact, at basically a very early age, this network is like a sponge for information. It's going to download programs from our parents, from society, from media, everything around us. It makes up our beliefs and models of the world, where we fit in the world. And because it's our survival mode, it's constantly looking for what can hurt us. Fear lives here. Our self-critic, the wandering mind is here. And the problem with this operating system is it's programmed before the age of 10. And unless we are conscious of this, we are making choices from this unconscious autopilot conditioned survival mode of the brain. So let me ask you, from what operating system do you think these choices were made? The war in Ukraine, the attack on the Capitol, George Floyd, the subsequent riots. We had a virus impacting the entire globe being labeled as the China virus, leading to nearly 4,000 anti-Asian hate crimes. I wasn't born in this country. I was actually born in post-war Vietnam to immigrant parents. And when I was just a few months old, we were forced to flee on this refugee boat filled with 2,000 other refugees. We spent 8 months on that boat in these unsanitary conditions. We spent another 3 months in this Philippine refugee camp. And then we were sponsored to America by a Catholic church. And growing up, I remember constantly being teased for the holes in my hand-me-down clothes, for the stinky food my mom sent me to school with. Go back to your home country, Chinky. Why couldn't my parents speak English? Why do we have to live in my neighborhood? Why couldn't we afford those toys the other kids had? Why me? That was my old programming. That was the default mode network. And I made choices from that place. My drive to succeed overtook my life. I went to the National Institute of Health, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, UCLA for training. I've learned to use the power of sound waves to pierce inside the body to be able to treat tumors. I use real-time x-rays to guide into blood vessels and deliver chemotherapy or open blood vessels that are closed. I was able to use magnetic fields to detect disease. I eventually became section chief of my hospital. Bought a fancy car, bought a fancy house, thinking that as long as I got success, that I would be worthy of love. But underneath my white coat, I was sick, overweight, diabetic, high blood pressure on several prescription medications. Sure, I got what they told me success was, but I wasn't happy. I was alive, but I wasn't living. I got the promotion, but I lost relationships. 6 sugar coffees every morning turned into 6-shot vodka sodas on the weekend. I became the poster child of a famous Dalai Lama quote when he was asked what he found most interesting about humanity. And he said this: man, because he would sacrifice his health in order to make money, then sacrifice his money to recuperate his health. This is the result of the default mode network. This is the result of old programming. Old programming will lead That's the result of old programming. But then I was given a gift. That very same year, I got my chronic disease diagnosis. I had lost some relationships and I had a tear in my shoulder, and they told me I might not be able to operate anymore. What? 16 plus years of training? How am I going to afford to take care of my family? Everything in my old programming told me life might as well be over. Then I met Ishmael. He was the same age as me, terminal pancreatic cancer. I was asked to drain 10 liters of fluid from his belly. And I remember when I was approaching his room to brace myself to meet somebody worse off than me. And I opened the door, and I just remember so clearly. I walk in and I feel his positive energy, his big, bright smile. Hey, Dr. Vuu, how are you, man? I can't wait for you to drain this fluid from me because it's getting in the way of sexy time. I had to laugh. He broke me out of my state. But I had to ask him, Ishmael, how are you so positive now? He says, Doc, trust me, it didn't always used to be this way. I used to be angry all the time and stressed out. But after this, I learned that the only thing I have control over is how I choose to show up. And I choose to show up with love and positivity, man. That's it. Here's a man who's about to die, reminding me about how to live, reminding me that the power of choice is ours. You see, old programming will lead to the same thoughts, the same feelings, the same actions, all from the same choices. So how do we get out of this? We have to be able to see the old programming, and we make some conscious new what? Choices. New choices led me to actually break out and learn from world thought leaders in health, wellness, and longevity. I learned from spiritual biologists such as Bruce Lipton and Deepak Chopra, personal growth experts like Tony Robbins, Vishen Lakhiani. And what I learned was a new approach to life and medicine. Here's what I learned most: that how we live our life is medicine. New choices also led me to do a deep dive in longevity medicine, which led me to the work of this gentleman, Dan Beutner. You see, in the early 2000s, he was actually given a monumental task to reverse engineer aging and longevity. So he and his team traveled all around the world to see where people live the longest, where are the highest concentrations of people living over 100. They found 5. They called them the blue zones. Now, he and his team actually uncovered how people living in the blue zones were living so long. And they found some common traits. Ancient wisdom and principles demonstrated that they moved every single day. They had rituals that deal with stress. They didn't stuff themselves with food. They occasionally celebrated with wine. They had deep connections with friends, family, loved ones, a tribe, and they all had purpose. Now, the people in the blue zones didn't seek out to be the longest lived people on the planet. It was just a byproduct of how they chose to live, but more importantly, who they chose to be. But how do our choices affect biology? Well, the science of epigenetics tells us this, that the fate of our cells isn't determined by the DNA that resides in it, but the fate of our cells, our longevity, our performance, our health, all these things are actually determined by how the genes interact with its cellular environment. So the next question is, can our choices affect our cellular environment? I first looked at these things called telomeres. Now, telomeres are basically the end caps of our DNA that protects our DNA from fraying every time our cell divides. It turns out that telomeres are also a marker for longevity. Shortened telomeres are a marker for disease and a short lifespan, whereas preserved telomeres are a marker for longevity. We know that stress is actually the major driver of telomere shortening, whereas choices such as exercise, sleep, nutrition, purpose, a community actually preserves our telomeres. So we could see this example here of the choices that we make on the organism level actually changes the cellular environment, which actually affects our DNA. That's one example. I looked at another example for disease and longevity, another one being the CTRA. This is actually one of the cell danger responses. Now, back in the Paleolithic days, what happens is when our body senses danger, usually that was from a saber-toothed tiger or a neighboring village that's about to attack, it basically turns on the CTRA. And essentially what happens is this: when danger or stress is sensed by the cells in our body, it turns on this cascade of genes, which actually increases inflammation and lowers our immune system and puts us prone to get chronic disease. Now, fortunately, we don't have to deal with saber-toothed tigers anymore, but everyday perceived stresses, such as divorce, such as loss of a loved one, such as resenting somebody who's hurt you or somebody who's cut you off on the freeway, that drives the same response. Increased inflammation, decrease in immunity, which puts us prone to getting chronic diseases like heart disease, Alzheimer's, cancer, viral infections. Now, what turns off this process? Well, the same things: sleep, nutrition, movement, food, community, purpose. In fact, the more I started to study the biology of human performance and longevity, I started to see the same patterns. Whether it was the ancient wisdoms we gained from the blue zones, the telomeres, the CTRA, or even epigenetic clocks, which we didn't discuss, I realized there was the same pattern of things that showed up. The patterns here in these 5 categories of life most affect basically the cellular environment that basically controls our biology. It is our choices, particularly in these areas of life, that creates this energetic field in our body that actually speaks to our DNA in a moment-to-moment basis. And it gives our DNA the instructions to thrive or it's telling your DNA that you are in danger. Now, here's the thing. This energetic field we create isn't only felt by every single cell in your body, but goes outwards. Other people feel it as well. But the power of choice is ours. The choices that we make, again, create this energetic state in our body. And when we make choices that optimize our cellular health, we create this vibrant state in our body. I call it the thrive state. And in the thrive state, we're giving ourselves the signals for optimal health, longevity, and peak performance. When we make choices that diminish our cellular health, our cells think that we're in danger. That leads to poor organ function, poor health, chronic symptoms, and chronic disease. Now, let's use this model here to see how old programming, what I just talked to you about, that old default mode network, can actually give us disease. Let's start with the mental. What was my mindset? I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. That was my mental state. So I actually strive to do everything on my own. I put myself first rather than helping others. Poor spiritual state. I used to wear the mask of this white coat, look at me as this doctor. Call me Dr. Vuu. I didn't show you who I was authentically or vulnerably. Poor social state. Where do you think my emotions were? Stress, worry, anxiety, fear. That gave me, made me make choices that didn't allow me to sleep, eat, or move very well. The choices that I made in these areas of my life created an energetic state in my body. Which one was that? The stress and survive state. That's right. Increased inflammation, decreased immunity, chronic symptoms, chronic disease. But the power of choice is ours. Ishmael gave me the opening to make new choices. I had started to have new experiences. I began with sleeping, eating, and moving better. All of a sudden, I started to notice my body started to slim down. I had more energy. I was feeling alive, good emotional state. I started to connect with people that lifted me up, had a good community. And as I started to reverse my chronic conditions, I wanted to share with the world spiritual state. I started to change the things that I believed in. Like everything in my life is happening for me and not to me. And that my choices actually create my health and my reality. When I started to make new choices, I noticed a shift in the energetic system in my body. As I started to be in the thrive state and then combine it with the anti-aging and longevity medicine that I know, I actually was able to reverse all my chronic conditions, lose the inflammatory visceral fat, and biologically age backwards. This is the power of our choices. Now, I want you to see these are the choices that most affect the energetic state in our body. And these are the things we can all control. Let's go over a little bit on each one. Physical really comprises of three things. And I know there's a handout that is in the webinar that you can download, which is just a cheat sheet for the things that most affect health, that would most affect actually how to improve the symptoms of peripheral neuropathy. Remember, physical has three things: sleep, nutrition, and movement. Now, sleep is so important because it's the circadian rhythm. Our body is in that rhythm. And when that rhythm is off, our hormones are off and our biology is off. So it's so important. So make sure you get 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep. A few things that help, and you guys could ask me specific questions later on, is avoid blue light before you go to bed. Avoid eating right before you go to bed. Avoid alcohol before you go to bed. And early morning sunshine every single day actually helps with resetting your circadian rhythm. Next is movement. Just being sedentary locks your body in. Movement, any type of exercise, just walking every single day actually increases endorphins in your body, increases brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is very healing for central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So any kind of movement every single day is actually great. Now, specifically for peripheral neuropathy, focusing on balance, focusing on flexibility, strength, and exercise are important. Now, I'll answer more specific questions if you have them later. And then we have nutrition. Well, a few things to keep in mind. Many people that are, have peripheral neuropathy, diabetes could be one component. or impaired insulin resistance could be one component. So a really important thing is to monitor your blood sugar and to watch your carbs. Okay, so know your carbs, reduce sugar, reduce processed food. Now, another thing that could worsen symptoms of peripheral neuropathy is chronic inflammation hanging around. So an anti-inflammatory diet is really important too. What does that include? It includes omega-3s. You can get those from nuts, you can get them from fatty fish, and I recommend what I call the smash fish, which has low in mercury. What does SMASH stand for? Sardines, mackerel, anchovies, salmon, and herring. Those are some of the things to consider. Now, another thing when it comes to nutrition as it pertains to peripheral neuropathy is actually nutrient deficiencies. Nutrient deficiencies are more common around the world than it ever was before, and there's a reason for this. Reason number one is that a lot of our vegetables and produce are now being farmed in very nutrient poor soil. So there's less nutrients in the food that we eat. Here's another thing. When people put processed foods in their body and things that wreck our body, like sugar and things like that, it can cause our gut to be somewhat inflamed. So people with inflammatory bowel disease or some sort of leaky gut symptom could actually have decreased ability to absorb these nutrients that are so important. Now, here's the thing when it comes to nutrients, and I found that to get nutrients best delivered in the body, so we can get it from food, yes, but unfortunately, again, if you run into symptoms where you've got an inflamed gut, it's harder to get the nutrients in. There's actually a new technology that involves liposomal encapsulation. It's actually almost like a cell membrane around the nutrients, and when you take nutrients that way, it actually bypasses the normal uptake in your gut. So this is a way to actually improve the delivery of nutrients all throughout your body. This is Live On Labs actually sponsored this webinar, and I am actually a fan of Live On Labs because it's so important to be able to get nutrients where they need to go. Now, as it pertains to peripheral neuropathies, there's a few Live On Lab products that I like. One being magnesium is a great one. Glutathione is a great antioxidant. The B complex has those B1 and the other type of B vitamins that are important. And those people with sugar regulation issues, alpha lipoic acid is also great for that. So that's on the nutrition side. Next is social. It is positive nurturing relationships that actually is most important to be able to get into the thrive state. I had a patient named Bruce, and he had a liver cancer. And in order for us to get him basically a cure would be a liver transplant. Unfortunately, his cancers kept popping up and popping up and popping up. He couldn't get the liver transplant. And back when I was still doing procedures, we basically do this procedure where we spray chemotherapy into the tumor and treat it. Every couple months, more tumor would rise, more tumor would come up. And it started to come up so much that basically we ended up having to take some of his liver out. And right around that time, Bruce was telling me, Doc, I don't know if I have a lot of time left, but there's something I need to do before I go away. And I asked him what that was. He says, you know what, I've been estranged from my brothers for years. And so what he did, he started to write these personalized letters to his brothers saying, you know what, I wish things were different. I want to be able to heal what we had and reestablish our family. Now, I'm a medical doctor, but once he healed all those things there with his brothers, his tumors never came back. And it's been 7 years since. So I'm not saying that, him reconnecting and healing and living in a state of gratitude was a cure. However, I did notice that that change in state also coincided with those tumors never coming back. So here's a few messages he sent me from 2019. He thinks of me, often, no signs of the tumor. And, he sends me messages every couple of months thanking me. And it's one of the most rewarding things to hear as a doctor. So one of the things you could consider doing as you leave this webinar here is contact 3 people. Work on this social aspect. Reach out to someone you could thank. Reach out to someone you can help. And finally, reach out to someone you could forgive. Because forgiveness is not really for the other person. Forgiveness is releasing yourself from the stress of resenting someone. Then we have emotional. Um, Emotions. I believe that we as human beings face and should experience all of the emotions. That's great. But chronically feeling anger, worry, resentment, fear, hate actually drives the stress hormones and causes increased inflammation and decreased immunity. Whereas emotions like joy, like connection, like love, like gratitude are actually anti-aging emotions and will help with your symptoms as well. So what are some of the things you can do? Certainly exercise is a great thing. I do something called breath work, which is really important to be able to tap into our emotions. And let me just teach one quick technique here. I call it the 4-7-8 breathing. You breathe in for 4, you hold for 7, and you blow out for 8. Really focus on that long exhale because that actually activates your vagus nerve and it increases your parasympathetic nervous system. Other things you can do is massage, journaling, and remember, play. What you'll also notice is this. All these things are energetically connected. So when you just make one different choice to elevate your state, it permeates into other areas of your life. So if your emotions are off, you don't have to outfeel those emotions. If you sleep, move, or eat better, you'll start to feel better. Lastly, or not lastly, there's spiritual. Well, spiritual is really just about serving, knowing that we belong to something bigger. Now, Pablo Picasso said the meaning of life is to find your gift, but the purpose of life is to give it away. I think he's only partially right. I think it's more of a process of remembering than finding. I used to be somebody that just wanted to make people laugh and let people have fun. You know what? But when we tap into those states, that bring us joy, that make us feel free, whatever those things are, that's the authentic us. Those things are written in our DNA. And when we serve us to the world, that's our purpose. Your purpose is you. You are the gift. Purpose can also come from the things that we, struggle through, our challenges, our obstacles, because we grow from them. And the more we grow, the more we can give. The last thing is mental. Now, I want you to focus on 4 things, and we can get into more specifics in the Q&A session, but the 4 things we can control is basically our focus, our beliefs, our meaning, and our story. All these things change our biology and the way we feel. Think about if you focus on the things you have in your life versus things that you don't have in your life. Or if you focus on the things you can or can't control, how does that change the feeling? And remember, the feeling that we have, those emotions are medicines. The beliefs that we have in our life. When you wake up every morning, do you say, oh man, I have to wake up tomorrow? Or do you say, I get to wake up? Here's some beliefs that I hold very important in my life. The most important decision we make is whether we believe we live in a friendly or hostile universe, or another one. Life is simple. Everything happens for you, not to you. The meaning that we give to things, can we start to see what it's doing to us emotionally? And certainly the story we tell about ourselves to ourselves actually is could be healing as well. I'm going to skip that example there. But our story is so important because the biography, the story you tell about yourself to yourself, will actually dictate your biology. Look, I know it's not always going to be easy to make the right choice, particularly when we've got this default mode network hanging around. But even when it's hard, the power of choice is ours. There's a quote I love from Viktor Frankl. If you don't know who he is, he's a Holocaust survivor that saw his mother and brother murdered. He saw his father starved to death. He saw friends and family members tortured, but he still had this to say: between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space, there's a power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and freedom. So every time you've got this trigger that happens, every time you're feeling lazy on the couch, every time you feel like reacting to a coworker that's angering you, I want you to notice that trigger, and I want you to create space and then act. You create space by going for a walk onto nature, by meditation, or doing 10 deep breaths in and out, just like I showed you, in through your nose and out through your mouth. And what you'll notice is whatever you got triggered with, it calms everything down. You've created a little bit of space. Now, in that space, I want you to act, which is A, have awareness. Oh, where's that trigger coming from? Is it that story of I'm not being good enough? Is it that belief that I'll never lose weight because it's in my genes? What is that? Have that awareness. Usually it's coming from that old programming. Then C, once you can see that old programming, make a conscious choice. Who do you want to be? How do you want to show up? Do you want to be happy? Do you want to be confident? Do you want to be generous and giving or playful? Whatever it is, you choose. And once you choose, immediately take a new action. Will you choose to respond or react? Will you choose curiosity over judgment? Will you choose to forgive over resent? And the more of these new choices you make over old programming, you are actually rewiring your entire body and nervous system into the thrive state, and you upgrade your operating system. This is a process I've learned to go through every time something challenges me. Back in the ICU, I remember I wanted to react. I wanted to blame the hospital. I wanted to blame the doctors. But I wanted to believe. I wanted to pause, create space, and act. So I created a little space. I have the awareness that I was reacting, and I choose to believe that everything's happening for me, not to me. And I took action by asking the question, how is this happening for me? And I swear to God, right when I asked that question, the nurse asked me, Dr. Vuu, do you want to hold your daughter for the first time? And so I did. And I remember looking down at her. She had tube down her nose, IVs all over her arms. And I remember thinking, health complication or not, she's absolutely worthy of love. And I just realized at that moment, each and every one of us who is born, who's been gifted with this life, is absolutely perfect and worthy of love. Even me. And I remember in that instance, there was a wave of healing that just overcame me. Happening for me, not to me. And so what if, oh, here's an update. This is Kaya. She's very happy and very, very healthy as well. You can see happening for me, not to me. And so what if it was all a gift? The struggles, the diagnosis, the car accidents. What if it was all life's way of giving us a gift? What if it was the gift of pressure that it was giving us? And if we live with passion, if we live with purpose, if we live with that persistence of being our authentic selves, we bring the heat. And given this formula, if we bring the heat, and if life gives us pressure, it's really a matter of time before we create our next diamond and our next diamond. I know all of you that have gotten this diagnosis, and all of us who've gone through this pandemic together, we are already forging our own diamonds. So what if the world lived like this, created a little bit of space and made more conscious choices about the state that we live in? What if more and more of us were in the thrive state? You see, when we elevate our state, when we elevate our vibration, it's not only felt by every single cell in our body, but it permeates outwards. Your children, my children, the planet will have new access to this energy, this vibration. We become the seed of a new blue zone. So make the choice you want to see in the world. And remember to create a beautiful masterpiece for your life. That's the art of living. And that's the most powerful medicines you can do for yourself and for humanity. Thank you. I'll pause for questions.
Wow, Dr. V, that was an extremely fascinating and impressive presentation. I'm almost speechless. I feel like I'm just fuddling over my words at the moment, but thank you so much. I I know that a lot of our folks have really enjoyed this presentation so far. I've read some of the comments that have been coming through, and so let's go into some of the things that you did talk about, just to get a little bit more details, because I think our patients might find that to be helpful. So you had mentioned some foods that might help with stress and combating stress. Could you elaborate a little bit more into what that could look like, what that diet could look like, and some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one, I think time restricted feeding is actually a great little strategy for people to do. If you don't know what time restricted feeding is, it's really just narrowing the window you eat. And if you can narrow it down from like 12 hours to 10 hours to maybe 8 hours every single day, what you're doing is you're not allowing insulin to be secreted in the body the entire time and for your pancreas to be overworked. You know, if we do that, that actually leads to insulin resistance. Insulin resistance will worsen symptoms of peripheral neuropathy. So that's just like when you eat. Then it's what you eat. Well, we know that sugar and processed foods are very, very inflammatory foods. So just avoiding those things would be very important. A lot of people who might be insulin resistant already or have diabetes that leads to peripheral neuropathy, certainly you want your blood sugar controlled. So avoiding those sugar, starches, and things like that are very important. And the last part is really those anti-inflammatory foods. Anti-inflammatory foods are foods that are rich in antioxidants, such as berries are great with that. Blueberries are one of my favorites for that. Then we're also talking about omega-3 fats. Omega-3 fats you could get from fish oil, you can get from nuts, you can also get from fatty fish. So I would say those would be the main tenets of eating if you're dealing with peripheral neuropathy, is really watching your blood sugar control, not allowing insulin to be pumped, throughout the day, and then certainly eating an anti-inflammatory diet.
Yeah, and I think that speaks not to just those that have diabetic neuropathy, but a lot of other forms of neuropathy. So that's fantastic. We talk a lot about diet and exercise, right? So I want to kind of pivot to that right now. Are there any types of exercises that you recommend specifically, or similarly also frequency? How many times per week, per month should someone aim to exercise? Either someone that doesn't exercise at all working their way into it, and then what's that kind of ultimate goal, right? Where do you want to be?
Yeah, so our DNA was created so that we are moving every single day. So our ancestors were moving every single day, right? We had men that went out to hunt. The women would go gather food, and they'll be sitting and squatting. They'll be sitting on the floor. Now, chair sitting is something that really restricts our body. Our joints are all fixed in doing so, and our circulation is actually limited when we do that as well. So a lot of people think, oh, okay, well, I don't like going to the gym. That's not me. I mean, you could start slowly. I mean, if you just wake up every morning and walk outside with early morning sunlight, you're not only getting the vitamin D from the sunlight that resets your circadian rhythm, which is great, but also if you walk out in nature, you have phytochemicals in the air that actually helps reduce stress. And the reduction of stress, the reduction of cortisol actually reduces peripheral neuropathy symptoms. So you start off by doing something like that. And then just think about how you're moving during the day. Are you using conveniences like an escalator, an elevator, and things like that to get from place to place? Do you want to park all the way up front? Some people love to use, they have these fake, handicap placards, that are going in front. But let's say, but if you can walk, I would say it's okay to park further away. Or if there's something that was close by to your house that you normally drive to, walking there or biking there would be, something that's great too. And then the other things that I mentioned before is aerobic training. I typically say anywhere from 150 minutes a week of aerobic training. And again, that could be walking, or you could step it up by bit by just moving your arms as you walk and bringing up your heart rate. You don't actually have to be going, raising a big sweat. You need to just elevate your heart rate just a little bit to get that aerobic training in. Strength training will be really important because as we age, we have peripheral neuropathy. We want to have good strength and flexibility to maintain, and so we don't fall and things like that. And so, doing things like sitting on the floor, stretching, all those things are great exercises for peripheral neuropathy.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You had spoken a lot about breathing. And I found your technique actually I was doing it as you were doing it as well. And I found it to actually be extremely calming. But is there any other technique that someone should consider when trying to do some type of meditation or other type of calming, either within the state of, stress, or similarly later, just trying to really calm your body and get in tune?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a great question. I think that breathing technique works because, no matter what your mobility issues are, you can certainly do that. Um, Now, one of the things that I find, pretty useful is I'll see if I can demonstrate this. I don't know if I can. I don't have a wall behind me, but if you imagine doing the same breath, and what you do is you're standing up. Let me see if I don't have room behind me. But if you're standing up, and what you do is you just lift one leg up, and if you need a chair or a table to hold on to, you could just hold on to that. Lift one leg up, breathe for 4 seconds in while you lift your leg up, hold it there for 4, and then breathe out. Now, when you do that, it's almost kind of like box breathing, but maintaining the balance. And here's why this is so effective. That most people will need to focus on the balancing part of that and the breathing part of that, that it's very difficult for your brain to go think, oh my God, what was I worrying about just now?
Mm-hmm.
So that actually kind of, turns that part, that default mode off so that you can focus on what you're doing there. So that's another great technique as well.
And obviously, a lot of these techniques help people get into what you're calling the thrive state. And is there any evidence, and this might be a hard one to answer, I admit, but is there any evidence that can show then the reversal or the lessening of symptoms, or perhaps the regeneration of the nerves, right? I mean, is there any proof that shows, hey, we do this, and obviously it helps our state of mind, but it might also help us as patients who suffer from neuropathy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we're starting to find more and more, um, if it not only dampens the symptoms, that's potentially slowly, potentially even reverse them. What we thought before were nerves were not regenerated. But what we do know is the capacity of stem cells to be activated to form new pathways. This is a concept called neuroplasticity. So, what the Thrive State about is just actually controllable factors that you can change the state of your body. There are things that we can't control that are not listed here, such as, maybe toxins we're exposed to, infections we're exposed to, and things like that. And I'm pretty sure you need to work with your physicians to see if you're exposed to any of those things. But these are the things we can control. And if you can't control these things, what you're doing is you're limiting the damage done, because most diseases we have in our body is worsened, and the contributing factor to a lot of them is the constant inflammation. So if we can work on the stress and we work on these things in those 5 major areas I just shared, we're actually reducing that inflammation, we're reducing that damage. And when your body's not thinking you're in a stress state and it has more energy to expend to its stem cells for the healing, we could potentially reverse some of the things that it's happening. So,
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything specific yet, but I've seen, like myself, reversing diabetes and insulin resistance. So I would say it depends on where you catch your disease and how much irreversible damage is done first.
Right.
You know, in the disease process, it normally starts with inflammation. Inflammation starts to, whittle away tissues. When it gets to a point where it's scarred down, there's no regeneration. But when you can catch it, where it's still sort of this active inflammatory process, 100% we can actually slow that process down and improve symptoms.
And, one of the final questions I want to ask for you today, and I know there's been a lot of others that have been popping up on the questions box, and for those that were not able to directly answer, please know we'll try our best to do some type of follow-up after this program. And again, the recording will be provided to you. So for those that might have missed some of those tips or tricks, we'll be able to get that information out there again so you can rewatch. But, a lot of our patients are suffering from enormous pain, and they would love to do this. They just, right, they can't. They either can't do the exercises, or they can't get into that mental state to, have this thrive state, because the pain is just so consuming. what would you say to that person who, you know, is listening to you and saying, hey, that sounds great, but there's no way I can do it because of the various examples that I just referenced or others that I haven't? What would you speak to on that?
Yeah, I get that a lot sometimes. I know pain can be so debilitating, and it affects your sleep, it affects your ability to do different things. And I probably say in that instance, allow yourself a little bit of a little bit of grace. And if you look through the things that we talk about, there are certain things that are not necessarily in the physical space that we can do. You know, are you reaching out with people? You know, has the pain allowed you to just, you know, push everybody else out, or
Yeah.
have you been able to be open and still connect, you know, with people, bring people in? You know, that's in that state. Is your focus on the pain, or is your focus maybe, you know, going to somewhere else? Is there somebody else in your life you could help at that moment? You know, if we start to change our focus on the pain towards something else, if we focus more on trying to help others, you know, there's parts of our brain that actually dip down. And the thing is, when we start to help people, our biology is such that it increases these feel-good hormones that happen in our body, which is actually known to reduce the pain. So here's the thing, is when we look through the things that I just talked about, this tiniest little new choice that you can make will start to change the state in your body. And so you just make one new choice, another new choice, another new choice, and you'll notice over time that the thing that, you know, had you worried the most, like the pain, that will improve. And you basically just stack on those things.
Yeah, and I think highlighting just taking those small steps every day, right? If you're not able to walk 20 minutes a day, then maybe walk 4 times at 5 minutes a day to get to that 20-minute goal. Similarly, a lot of our patients are always complaining about how their pain or their other symptoms are worse at night. And we find that to be true because you have nothing else to do and you're just kind of lying there in the dark thinking, right? I know my brain goes a mile a minute, at night. But I think to your point, trying to focus your attention as best as you can, and just making those choices as best as you can. But of course, work with your primary healthcare physician to identify some other medications or other things that you can be doing to help get you in a better state so that you can be open to this. So Dr. V, this has been lovely. Again, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for joining today. We will have this recording and the slides up on the Foundation for Peripheral Neuropathy's website for future viewing. And if you have any questions, feel free to just reach out to us directly. The contact information is included on the slide below, but I think everyone knows how to reach us. And lastly, just feel free to continue supporting us so that we can put together these types of programs. Again, thank you to Live On Labs. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye. Happy holidays.